Hello everyone, this is Alex Cordabard and welcome back to Learning the Basics of Blender. I hope that you're enjoying this series and that you're learning something. If you have any questions at all, just leave a comment or send me a message and I'll be more than happy to help. Continuing with the basics, in this tutorial we're going to be learning how to texture our objects. So let's get started. Just like in the materials tutorial, we need to change it from Blender Render to Cycles Render if it's not already selected. Now with the cube, go to the Materials tab and click on Use Nodes. Instead of color, we're going to be clicking on this little icon right here, and you can see that texture panel opens up. Now Blender has a lot of procedural textures right here that are mathematically generated, and we'll talk about these a little bit later, but for now we're going to focus on image texture, which is one of the most used ones. Image texture takes an image from your computer and imports it into Blender, and then it maps it onto your 3D object. So go ahead and click that, then go over here and click on Open. In the description I'm going to put a link to the image that I'm using. It's off a website called CGTextures.com, and you can sign up for free and have 16 megabytes of free image downloads every day. So I recommend going there and checking it out because it's really good for textures. Now once you've downloaded this image or taken one that you want, you just need to find it on your computer by using these buttons over here. Once you've found it, select it and click on Open Image. What we need to do now is map our image to our cube. In order to do that, we need to add a new window to work in. To add a new window, go up here to the top right corner of the 3D view and you will see 3 diagonal lines. Once your mouse turns into a crosshair, just left click and grab and drag your mouse all the way out here, and you will see that it adds a new window. To close a new window that you've added, just do the same thing, left click and drag to the right. Once you've done that, you're given the option of either merging the left window with the right window, or if you go in the other direction, the right window with the left window. I'm going to right click to get rid of that because we need this window that we just added. We're going to go down here and change it from 3D view to UV image editor. Now with the cube, hit tab to go into edit mode, and you will see that your image pops up right here in the UV image editor. Make sure everything is selected by hitting the A key and then hit U, and you're given a panel for the UV mapping, and select the first thing, which is unwrap. Now you can see that the cube has been unwrapped to the image right here. For us to be able to see it on our 3D object, what we need to do is go down here and change it from solid to texture. You can also hit Alt Z for the shortcut to switch between solid and textured mode. And if you still don't see your image in the UV image editor or your 3D object, just select everything and unwrap it. Go down here, click this little icon right here, and select your image. Now you might be asking yourself, what is UV? Well, just like in the 3D space, we have the coordinates X, Y, and Z. Since those are taken for here, in the texture space we use U, V, and W. But W is usually omitted because an image is two-dimensional. Now, if you do not want to use this image, you could just go down here and click on Image, New Image, and put UV Test Grid. This way you can still follow along and see what the texture does to the 3D object. Now before we do anything else, I'm going to close the mesh tools by hitting the T key. And now if we go Control Tab and go into Face Select mode, you will see that if I select any of these faces, that they are all mapped to this image. You can see by the vertices right here that make up that face. So all of these faces are each mapped to the entire image. Now if I select everything by hitting A and go back to my other image, hit 1 to go into front view, you will see that the bricks right here are kind of squashed. The reason for that is because the cube has square faces, but right here it's projected as a rectangle. So an easy way to fix that is, just like in the 3D space, you can hit G, R, and S to rotate, scale, and grab it. And just like in here, you can constrain those. So if I hit S and X, and then make these projected faces more of a square, you will see that the bricks are now normal and they are not squashed anymore. To move around in the texture space, you could middle mouse click and move your mouse to move, and mouse wheel up and down to zoom in. There are different ways of mapping your cube to your texture. If we go over here in edit mode still with everything selected and hit U and now select Smart UV Project and click on OK, you can see that all of the faces of the cube have been projected onto different parts of the texture. This method can work, but if you zoom in, you will see that none of the edges of the faces are connected, and this can leave gaps in your texture on your cube. So I recommend not using this one unless you can't really see it. Now if I go into front view by hitting 1 on the numpad, and we're going to try a different one, hit U and select Project from View. This one is used quite often, and it's really useful on objects that are two-dimensional, because as long as you're facing directly the object and project it from view, it will look perfect. But if you look up here, you can see that the top and the sides of the cube are really stretched, and the back, just as the front, is fine. The reason for that is, if we take a look at the side over here, you can see that it's this side right here. Now this side is scaled down right here, and it's also not a perfectly squared face, so that's why it's stretching. If we grab these two and grab them out and then scale it up to make this face more of a cube shape, you can see that the texture now works fine. Another way of using this project from view is going into face mode by Control Tab and selecting face, then just select a face and hit U, project from view. And now, one at a time, you can project the faces from the view and they will look fine, because you're facing the face directly, and it will just put that face and unwrap it onto your texture. Now this method is useful for 2D objects, as I said, but for 3D objects, the best way to do it is to use seams. You can imagine the seams of Blender just like the seams of your t-shirt. When you have a t-shirt on you, it kind of has a 3D volume to it. But if you were to take scissors and cut it everywhere there's a seam or where the stitching is, then you could lay it out flat into one piece of cloth. This is what Blender does. When you mark a seam, it tries to cut the cube and then flatten it to a 2D object and then project it onto your texture. Now, one more quick thing before I go into seams. If I hit Tab and select everything and hit U, another project from view is project from view bounds. And this one is exactly the same as the last one, except it fills up the whole image. Now going on to seams. Hit Control Tab and go in Edge Select mode, and select this edge. Hit Control E to bring up the Edges menu, and select Mark Seam. Now if I select everything and hit U and unwrap, you can see that the cube is very distorted now, or the texture of the cube. Also, one thing, for seams you have to hit U and unwrap, because all of the other mapping methods ignore the seams. So make sure to hit unwrap. Now the reason that this is so stretched is because it's trying to cut this right here where the seam is, and then unwrap the rest of the cube and flatten it. Except it can't because there's only one cut. So the correct way to add seams is you have to do it in a way that will cut the cube and flatten it in a proper way for it to be projected onto the image. I'm going to select this edge again and hit Ctrl E and clear that seam. And now I'm going to select these three edges over here, these ones, and these ones, so that I have all of these edges selected. Now I'm going to hit Ctrl E and mark that seam, select everything with the A key, and now hit U and unwrap. And you can see that it's unwrapped this cube into 6 faces, and they are all connected. Now I'm going to show you exactly what's happening with the seams. So where all of these red lines are is where it's going to be cut and flattened out. So I'm going to maximize this window, and I will show you exactly what's happening with the cube. I'm going to select these edges and hit V to cut them. You don't have to do this, I'm just showing you. So select those, and then it's cutting down here and also down here. So you can see exactly what the seams are doing. It's basically unfolding the cube to look like this. And you can see that that's exactly how the cube looks right here, because it is then projected onto your texture. Now another reason to add seams and unwrap it this way is because if you go over here and click on image and then select image painting, hit N to bring up the properties and just pick any color and draw on it, you can see that you can draw on whichever face you want. But if I go over here and undo all of this, clear all the seams, and then undo the painting, and if I hit, let me turn off image painting so you can see the UVs. If I hit U and I reset it to how it was before, where all of the faces were overlapped on top of each other, and now if I wanted to have the faces have different parts of the textures or different details on each face, then if I go over here and go to image painting, you can see that if I paint it, it will paint on every single face because they are all on top of one another. So that is another reason why marking seams and unwrapping it like that is the best method, because you can then do exactly as you would like with your texture and your cube. One last thing that we're going to do before we end off is learn how to texture a more complicated mesh. I'm going to go down here and close my image painting and also hit N to close that panel. Now I'm going to go back to object mode with the tab key and hit X and delete the cube. Shift A, add mesh, monkey. This monkey is called Suzanne, and we are going to learn how to texture her. So first of all, I'm going to go over here to materials and add a new material. Change it to image texture just like before. Hitting tab, I'm going to hit U and then unwrap. And instead of using the brick image, I'm going to use the UV test grid like before. Going to image, selecting new image, and then UV test grid and hit OK. Or you can use the one that we added before if you still have it, but I deleted mine. Now going over here, just select that image. Alright, now that we unwrapped it, you can see that it's very stretched and doesn't look good at all. So if we try another method of unwrapping, we could use project from view, you can see that it looks really good, except over here towards the top and also the ears, it's really stretched. So we're going to learn how to add seams to this to unwrap it nicely. Now it's important with any face model to not add seams directly on the face or the main features such as the eyes, the nose, or the mouth, because you will get some seam marks on it and it won't look good. So a tip is to keep the seams always to the back or on the sides. Just try to keep them out of the view of the face or whatever is going to be in focus of the camera. Going into edge select mode, I'm going to Alt right click this edge and then hitting C to bring up my brush circle. I'm going to middle click to deselect these, also this one, and then just with all of these selected, Control E, mark seam. Now I'm going to unwrap it, and you can see that where the seam is marked, Suzanne was split in half and the face was laid out and flattened, as you can see right here. Now it looks pretty good right now. Most of the checkers or the boxes on the texture are all the same size, except right here on the ears you can see that it's really stretched. So to fix that, we are going to separate the ears from the rest of the head. Just select along the ear right here by shift right clicking the edges until you get this loop right here. Mark that seam and then do it on the other side too. And mark that seam. Now you can see if I select everything and unwrap it that it looks a little bit better, but we still have some stretching up here. So to fix that, the reason for that is because right now the ear is just separated from the rest of the head, but it's still unwrapping as a 3D object. What we want to do is for it to cut the ear more so that it's able to flatten it. So we're just going to select these four and these four edges on the other side. Control E, mark seam, and now go ahead and unwrap it and you will see that it looks a lot better. One other problem you will see though is that if you look at one half of the mesh or one half of the texture coordinates right here, you will see that this half is much bigger and then for some reason this half has scaled down. To fix that, just hit F6, click on angle based and then reselect angle based, and it should fix it to where everything is proportional again. Now you will see that one last thing we need to do is right here the squares are a little bit smaller than the rest of the head. So to easily fix that, the reason is because right here you could see that everything is getting a little bit pinched together. So we need to cut that a little bit to relieve the pinching. So select these two edges, Control E, mark seam, and now you will see when I hit U to unwrap, over here it cuts it and now it's not also squashed together and it gives a much better result. Now all of the squares and the texture is fine and this is how it should be. So this is a good way of using seams. Now if you have any questions at all, just send me a message or leave a comment and I'll be more than happy to help you out. I hope this tutorial has helped you to learn the basics of texturing, and I'll see you in the next one.